She danced to save her brother's life, never expecting a billionaire to be watching. But when he offered her protection, it came with a cost far deeper than money, and a secret that could either ruin them both or lead to a love forged through fire and sacrifice. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The wind swept dry sand across the cracked steps of the village square as Amina tied the last golden thread to her wrists. Her feet were bare. Her eyes, lined with kohl, were steady but heavy with the weight of hunger, worry, and years lost to silence. Children gathered on the roofs above, their faces hollow but expectant. Tonight, she would dance not for joy, but for survival. Amina's dance had become the village's hush. Not quite rebellion, not quite surrender, just the only form of beauty left when food was scarce and futures unsure. She danced for coins, for rice, for her little brother Samir. He watched her from the crowd, all of 13 but hardened by fear. Their parents had died 3 years ago. Since then, she'd been mother, father, sister, and breadwinner. The burden showed in her shoulders, not her face. In the firelight, she moved like something carried by the wind, fluid, proud. Then came the shouting. A truck screeched to a stop. Armed enforcers leapt from the back. Dust clouded the scene as Samir was dragged by the collar, his legs kicking. Or a voice barked, "His name is on a ledger." Amina ran, heart pounding. "He's just a child." One of the guards shoved her back. He ran up water charges, stole fuel. "It adds up." She pleaded, cried, begged, offering the coins she'd just earned, the thin silver chain around her neck, even her grandmother's scarf. None of it mattered. Samir was tossed into the truck like cargo. By morning, he was gone. She sat outside the local office for hours. No answers, no bail, no mercy. It was nearly dusk when the stranger arrived. He didn't step from a car. He floated out of a polished black SUV like he belonged to another world entirely. Slim-cut suit, polished shoes, sunglasses even as the sun was falling. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence quieted the dust itself. The man who spoke on his behalf was younger, softer-eyed. "Amina bint here?" She stood slowly. "Yes. Lawyer is hosting a private gathering. He's requested cultural dance. Traditional. Dignified." Amina stiffened. "And?" "Us, you'd be paid in full, plus your brother's release, quietly handled, no legal complications." The ground tilted under her feet. "Who is your employer?" "Rashid Al-Mansoor." The name landed like a drumbeat. The oil magnate, billionaire, untouchable. She swallowed. "Why me?" He paused. "You came recommended." Her mind screamed caution, but Samir's face, cuffed, frightened, crushed the noise. She nodded. "I'll do it." That night, they flew her in a private plane to the capital. The palace gates opened as if swallowing her. Marble floors, gold trim, waitstaff who didn't speak, walls too clean to trust. They gave her a silken costume, modest, elegant, deep emerald. The makeup artist said nothing, just traced the lines of her face like she was being painted for war. In the ballroom, laughter echoed like thunder through crystal chandeliers. Men in tailored suits, women in jewels that could pay off entire villages. Amina stepped onto the stage, her pulse thundered in her chest. And then, silence. Music began, low, steady, the rhythm of the desert wind. She moved as she always did, with grace, with memory, with pain stitched into every flick of her wrist. No seduction, no illusion, just truth disguised as motion. Then she saw him. Seated at the end of the long table, flanked by guards and advisors, was Rashid Al-Mansoor. Sharp-jawed, unreadable and still. His gaze pierced but did not devour. He didn't applaud, he didn't blink. He simply watched. When the music ended, no one clapped, no one dared. She bowed and left the stage. An hour later, she was escorted out the back door. But upstairs, Rashid removed his cufflinks and said softly, "Find out everything about her, and fast." Amina sat alone in a guest house room not far from the palace, still dressed in the green silk, her feet aching, her stomach hollow. The silence was louder than any music she'd danced to that night. She hadn't been dismissed, cruelly, efficiently. No thank you, no promise, no mention of Samir. She folded her arms over her chest, trying to still the trembling. Had she been used? Had she risked her dignity for nothing? Had she just danced for the richest man in the country, only to be forgotten the moment the last note faded? A soft knock broke the silence. It was the assistant from earlier, the young man with the gentle eyes. He stepped inside, holding a sealed envelope. She opened it with shaky fingers. Inside was a voucher for more money than she'd ever seen. Enough to feed a village. Enough to pay Samir's debt twice over. And a note. "Your brother will be released at dawn. He'll be driven to the address listed below. You are under no further obligation." There was no signature, no flourish, just initials. She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. Her heart screamed with gratitude, confusion, and fear. Who was this man who moved lives like pieces on a chess? That morning, she returned to her village. Samir was already there, seated on the broken front steps, a bag of fruit beside him, and a look of wonder on his face. "Just let me go," he whispered. A man in a suit said, "I had a sister who dances with dignity. Then they gave me oranges." Amina smiled through the tears. She hugged him tight and held on for a long time. The next few days passed in silence. She told no one what had happened. Her payment allowed her to repair the roof, restock food, and get Samir back in school. The neighbors speculated maybe she had stolen something. Maybe she had found a rich suitor. Maybe she had betrayed her honor. Let them talk. But Rashid Al-Mansoor had not forgotten. In a skyscraper far from her village, Rashid stood before a high glass window overlooking the city he helped build. The evening sun glinted off steel towers and rooftop helipads, yet his mind was elsewhere. "She's not what I expected," he said quietly. The assistant nodded beside him. "You said to find out more." Rashid turned slowly. "And?" "She lives in the southern quarter of Al-Harif. No husband, parents deceased, raised her brother alone. She's never been arrested, never taken a handout, works odd jobs, refuses street performances. That was her first private event." Rashid studied the file in his hand. Photos, village reports, witness statements. "He didn't dance to survive," he murmured. "She danced to protect." "The word accept charity," the assistant added. "I know," Rashid said. "That's why I'm not offering it." He snapped the folder shut. "Prepare a contract," he said, "one she'll want to read, and make sure it comes with respect, not pity." As the assistant left, Rashid remained at the window. His reflection stared back at him, clean lines, impeccable suit, hardened eyes. For years he'd hosted parties filled with glittering people who danced to be seen. But that night, he had watched a girl dance with no hunger for attention, no thirst for admiration. She had danced like she was protecting something sacred, like every movement was a shield, a warning, a story. And now, he wanted to know what came next. Smoke curled above the rooftops of the village as Amina stepped off the bus, her heart thudding before her feet even touched the ground. She smelled it before she saw it. Ash, burnt wood, charred earth. People whispered, stepping aside as she passed. Children stood frozen near the well, their eyes wide and fearful. Their home was gone. The small clay house she had shared with Samir was nothing more than scorched walls and a broken door. The roof had caved in. Their few belongings, what little furniture they had, her mother's old blanket, everything was blackened and ruined. Samir came running from the neighbor's yard, barefoot and shaken. "Started just after you left for the market," he cried, throwing himself into her arms. "Someone threw a bottle. I saw the fire in the back window, then it spread." Amina held him close. Her mind raced, heart breaking. It was no accident, she whispered. Retaliation, debt collectors, envy. Someone had wanted to remind her that no one climbs too high in a place where everyone else is still starving. Before she could gather her thoughts, the sound of engines echoed down the main road. A line of black SUVs, again, but this time they didn't stop at the edge of the village. They drove straight to the ashes of her home. The doors opened with practiced silence. Out stepped Rashid Al-Mansoor, flanked by 2 bodyguards. His presence cut through the dusty air like a blade. The crowd hushed. Amina's stomach tightened. She stood her ground. "You followed me here?" she asked. "Me," Cully replied calmly. "I came because I heard—" She blinked. "How?" "Argamble for me. I make it my business to know when things are destroyed after I've touched them." He looked around, eyes scanning the wreckage, then turned back to her. "This fire wasn't about your brother. It was about you." "I'm not your responsibility," she said coldly. He tilted his head. "You're right, which is why I'm offering a choice." She waited, arms crossed. Launching a cultural initiative, education, preservation, performances, international outreach. I need someone who knows what dignity looks like, someone who won't be bought or silenced. I want you to serve as an advisor. You'll be paid generously. Your brother will be enrolled in a protected school program. No one will threaten you again. The village was dead quiet. Amina stared at him, stunned. "Why me?" "You know why?" "I'm not a prop," she snapped, "and I don't trust men who make offers in ashes." Rashid didn't flinch. "Then don't answer now, but this is real." He handed her a folder. Documents, signatures. Then he turned and walked away. That night, she barely slept. Neighbors brought food and blankets. Samir curled beside her in what remained of their courtyard, his head on her arm. The stars above seemed colder than usual. If I go," she whispered aloud. "You should," Samir said, softly. "But don't go quiet, don't go small. Don't let the palace silence your soul." Amina turned to look at him. His eyes were serious, older than they should have been. "Why do you believe in him?" she asked. "I don't," Samir said. "I believe in you." By morning, the decision was made. The jet soared above the clouds, sleek and quiet, but Amina's heart was anything but still. She sat upright in a plush leather seat, arms folded, eyes darting around the cabin like a trapped bird trying to memorize every exit. Across from her, Rashid sat silently, reading documents as if she weren't there. His posture calm, his expression unreadable. The assistant beside her offered tea. She declined. Everything here, soft rugs, silver trays, the view of clouds rolling below, felt like something she didn't belong in. She couldn't shake the memory of smoke curling above her home, of her brother's voice telling her to stay loud. "You'll be staying in a private wing of the estate," Rashid said without looking up. "You'll have freedom of movement and time to adjust. No one will give you orders." She narrowed her eyes. "Except you." He finally met her gaze. "Not even me." His words didn't soften her, but they intrigued her. They landed just past sunset. The estate wasn't a palace in the traditional sense. It was more a fortress carved from glass and sandstone, with wide courtyards, fountains, and gardens that whispered luxury instead of shouting it. A driver opened her door. A woman in a tailored hijab greeted her warmly. "I'm later," she said with a nod. "You'll be reporting to me for orientation." Inef followed, her steps cautious. Lion led her through a corridor of open arches, past art installations and quiet staff, to a spacious private suite. The windows opened to a terrace overlooking a peaceful garden. A bookshelf lined with poetry in Arabic and English. Clothes hung in the closet that were modest but finer than anything she'd ever owned. She touched the edge of a linen sleeve. It felt like silk against her skin. "Is it my life?" she whispered under her breath. But it was, at least for now. That evening she sat on the terrace, watching the garden lanterns flicker as if waiting for a storm. Her phone buzzed. It was Samir. She answered quickly. "Are you safe?" he asked. She murmured. "I saw the pictures Layan sent. Your room looks like a hotel. Feels like a dream." Demir paused. "Just don't let it become a cage." Her chest tightened. "Promise me," he added, "you'll still be you." Amina didn't reply right away. Then softly, "I'm not even sure who that is anymore." She hung up and turned as a soft knock came to her door. Rashid stood outside. He didn't enter, he just waited, hands behind his back, gaze steady. And said, "I know this isn't easy," he said. "Fashionable," she agreed, "but I'm not here for comfort." He nodded. "We leave for Dubai in 2 days. You'll attend meetings, speak about heritage, represent the face of the program. After that, depends on you." She tilted her head. "Do you always make decisions this fast?" He hesitated. "Not always. But sometimes, the right thing doesn't need time to prove itself." There was a moment of silence between them, not awkward but weighted. Then he turned to leave, but before he did, he said something quietly. "Strength isn't just about surviving flames, Amina. Sometimes it's choosing what to build after." When the door closed, she stood motionless for a long time. Then she stepped onto the terrace, barefoot on the cool stone. The stars were clearer here, distant, daring her to reach higher. And for the first time since the fire, she let herself believe. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning. The chandeliers above shimmered like a constellation trapped in glass. The Dubai Gala was a masterpiece of modern opulence, gold-trimmed ceilings, mirrored pillars, and music that floated like perfume in the air. Amina stood near the entrance, draped in a modest yet elegant navy gown provided by Layan. Her hair was pinned back, her eyes outlined with caul, but her spine remained stiff with caution. Rashid was a few steps ahead, greeting dignitaries and heads of philanthropic boards. She noticed how effortlessly he switched between Arabic, English, and French, how his handshake carried weight. When he finally turned to her, he extended an arm. "Walk with me." She hesitated, then took it. They glided through the crowd, every step an invitation to be seen. Rash paused before a semicircle of donors and introduced her clearly. "Is Amina Zahran, our lead cultural liaison and voice of community outreach." The smiles that followed were tight, polite, polished. She felt them, the eyes, the calculations. A woman in a silver gown, with a name tag reading Delia Al-Hariri, leaned forward. "You're the village girl, aren't you, from the video Rashid's foundation posted?" Amina's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes." Delia chuckled. "So, this is a social project. How touching." Rashid's gaze snapped to her, cold, direct. "Hail step foot soldier. I would advise you not to confuse background with worth." "Oh, I didn't mean." "You did," he interrupted, "and I don't entertain people who insult my team." Silence fell. Then Rashid stepped away, leading Amina with him without waiting for the woman to recover. They stopped near the staircase, the music shifting into something slower. Amina pulled her arm back. "You didn't have to do that," she said. She crossed her arms. "I don't need you to fight my battles." "I wasn't fighting," Rashid replied. "I was warning them." She frowned. "You think that makes it better?" "But I think it makes it honest." They stood in silence. A waiter passed with a tray of dates and almonds. Amina reached for none of it. The rest of the evening passed with polite conversations and distant glances. She noticed how people treated her differently, depending on whether Rashid stood beside her or not. Some smiled at her with pity, others avoided her entirely, but a few, surprisingly, asked her real questions about her work, her ideas. Still, it wasn't until much later, after the last speeches, after the lights dimmed and the music softened into a slow jazz hum, that the tension between them began to shift. They stood alone on a stone balcony, the city glowing behind them like a fallen galaxy. Amina leaned against the rail, finally exhaling. "I used to think Dubai was a dream city," she said, "until I realized dreams can be cold too." Rashid joined her, hands in his pockets. "Here," he said. "But I didn't feel like I belonged until I left." She turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Mother died when I was 13, Amina said softly. "My father, after that. I was barely a child when I started working. Samir was a baby." Rashid didn't speak. "I used to dance to make him laugh, then I danced to feed him, then I danced to keep him from being taken away." Still, he said nothing. But his eyes, those calculating, guarded eyes, softened, and that silence between them no longer felt like distance, it felt like understanding. A gust of warm air rolled across the balcony, lifting a strand of Amina's hair and brushing it across her cheek. She didn't move. Her voice, when it came again, was lower, ahead, but fragile. "Wyatt used to be angry all the time, at the world, at God, at men who had power and used it like a weapon, at women who looked through me like I didn't belong in the same room." Rashid shifted beside her, but didn't interrupt. "Then one day," she continued, "I realized anger was the only thing keeping me from disappearing." She looked up at the stars, too dim to see clearly here, buried under city lights. But she knew they were there. "I still carry it," she said, "but I try not to let it lead me." Rashid leaned on the railing next to her, folding his arms, his gaze distant. "My mother came from nothing," he said quietly. "Her family called her a traitor when she married my father. They said she'd sold her soul for a palace." Amina's head turned slowly. It was the first personal thing he'd told her. "He spent her entire life trying to prove she hadn't," Rashid added. "Even after she died, I still hear her voice when I walk into these rooms." A long silence followed. Afterwards then he said, almost as if it wasn't meant to be spoken aloud, "She would have liked you." Amina blinked, caught off guard. She looked away, unsure what to say. Compliments from men like Rashid were rare, but more so when they came without pretense, without agenda. "I'm not here to be liked," she said finally. And Rashid agreed. "You're here to be heard." And for once, there was no power in his tone, no command, just truth. A few steps away, the glass doors to the ballroom opened. Layan stepped out, clearing her throat softly. "We're ready for the closing toast?" Rashid gave a faint nod. "We'll be right in." Layan's eyes met Amina's, and she smiled warmly before disappearing back inside. As Rashid turned to go, Amina placed a hand on the balcony rail. "Me?" she asked. He paused. "You could have chosen anyone, someone polished, someone with a degree and pedigree. Why the girl who danced in sand?" He faced her fully now. "Because everyone else gave me rehearsed lines," he said. "You gave me a mirror." Her breath caught. "Not all men in power use it like a weapon," he added. "Some of us are trying to build something worth surviving." Amina looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Don't expect me to follow blindly." "She don't," he said. "I expect you to question everything." They returned inside, side by side, not as employer and employee, not as charity and benefactor, but as something that hadn't yet been named, something built on fire and silence and the quiet beginnings of trust. As the toasts echoed through the room and guests lifted their glasses, Amina stood just behind Rashid, her chin high, her shoulders squared. And when she caught Dahlia staring again across the room, she didn't flinch. She met the glare, and didn't look away. The first headline landed like a dagger. Billionaire's mistress was a desert dancer. Then came the wave. Online gossip, tabloids, side-by-side photos of Amina in her gala gown and a grainy image of her bare foot at a village festival, arms raised in mid-spin. Social media exploded. Some cried scandal, others defended her dignity. But the most venomous voices were the ones in power. Whispers in boardrooms, murmurs at diplomatic events. By midweek, Rashid was summoned by his foundation's board. The room was silent until Malik, the foundation's oldest member, spoke first. "You must understand, Rashid," he began cautiously. "Your reputation is the backbone of our work. This story, whether true or exaggerated, distracts from our mission." Another voice added, Our partners in Europe are already asking questions." Rashid stood at the head of the long marble table, arms folded, eyes unreadable. "I will not fire her," he said simply. "This isn't about employment," Malik pushed. "It's about optics, perception. Your association with her—" "She's not an association," Rashid cut in. "She's a person." The room shifted. One man tapped his pen nervously. Another adjusted his tie. "Then what do you suggest we tell the donors?" Malik asked, voice tightening. "Tell them," Rashid said coolly, "that a woman with more dignity than any of you is helping lead our cultural initiative." Silence again. "You risk everything for her," someone muttered under their breath. Rashid's jaw tightened. Let them choke on their scandal. He walked out without waiting for consensus. Back at the estate, Amina stood by her window, the hum of distant conversation barely audible. Layan had warned her earlier that morning. "For turning you into a headline." Amina had nodded. She wasn't surprised. What stunned her was Rashid's silence. No explanation, no warning, not even a conversation. That night, after hours of pacing, she wrote the note. It wasn't dramatic, just a thank you, and a goodbye. By dawn, she was gone. She didn't flee with shame, she left with clarity. The small school outside the city welcomed her without question. The children remembered her from a previous visit, when she'd handed out books and helped paint the courtyard walls. Now, with sleeves rolled and hair pulled back, Amina taught them how to read road signs and recite poems from memory. It wasn't much, but it felt real. On the third day, just before sunset, a black SUV pulled into the dusty lot. She was washing chalk off her hands when she saw him. Rashid stepped out, dressed in a simple gray suit. No entourage, no noise, just him. The children paused, then, scattered with excited whispers. Amina didn't move. He walked up slowly, stopped a few feet away. "So this is where you ran?" She met his eyes. "I didn't run." "Because of them?" Amina's throat tightened. "No, because of me." He didn't respond. "I never wanted to be someone you had to defend," she said, voice low. "I didn't want to be a burden, a controversy." "You weren't." He took a slow step forward. "You think this is about damage control?" She blinked back tears. "Isn't it?" Rashid shook his head. "No. This is about you thinking you're not worth fighting for." Her lips parted, but no words came. He stepped closer. "I wasn't defending you," he said softly. "I was choosing you." Amina turned her face away, her throat tight with emotion she hadn't prepared for. The dusty air didn't explain the tears gathering in her eyes, nor could it hide the tremble in her hands. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, "to grow up knowing that any room you walk into, every eye is just waiting to remind you that you don't belong." "I do know," Rashid replied, voice steady but gentle. "You just think I don't because I wear a suit and own palaces." She looked back at him, surprised. He said quietly. "Was shamed for years for marrying a man from a different class. She never truly belonged in his world. I watched her smile at the very people who called her common behind her back. I watched her dignity burn in the fire of approval." His eyes softened, and still she stayed. "For me." Amina swallowed. "Then she was stronger than me." He said, "She was brave in her own way. You're brave in yours." He took her hand, and for once, she didn't pull away. "I didn't want you to come find me," she said after a long silence. "I know. I didn't think I could face you, not as the scandal, not as the poor girl from the village who danced to survive." "You weren't surviving," he said. "You were teaching the world something they didn't have the courage to understand." She frowned slightly. "What was I teaching them?" "Dignity doesn't need silk to shine." Amina's eyes filled again, but this time she let the tears fall. "I'm tired, Rashid," she admitted. "I'm tired of proving I'm more than what they say." "Then stop proving," he said. "Just be." He gently led her to sit beneath the courtyard tree, its leaves whispering above them as the wind stirred. "I don't want to live behind you," she said, "or under you, or be something you use to prove a point." "Then don't," he answered. "Stand beside me." The sun dipped lower, casting gold over the school's crumbling walls. A child ran past, barefoot and giggling, his voice ringing through the stillness. Amina watched him, something settling in her chest. For the first time in days, she felt her breath ease. "Promise it will be easy," Rashid said. "But I can promise I won't leave you to face it alone." She turned to him. "Even if they keep coming after me?" He nodded. "Then let them come. We'll outlast them." She smiled softly, almost reluctantly. "You speak like you've already made your decision." "I did," he said, "the moment you chose to walk into that palace with your head held high." A long silence passed between them. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be in your world." "You don't have to be," he replied. "We'll build a new one." She looked down at her hand in his calloused from chalk and labor, small against his strength, and for the first time, she didn't feel ashamed of it. She felt proud. As the call to prayer echoed faintly from a nearby village, Amina stood. Rashid followed. "Come back with me," he said. She nodded slowly. "But this time, we walk in together." The sun had barely risen when Rashid stepped into the village Amina once called home. It was smaller than he imagined. Humble clay houses, children chasing chickens through dusty alleys, and vendors arranging baskets of pomegranates beneath tattered awnings. He was not dressed in royal garb, no tailored suit or signature cologne, just a plain shirt, worn boots, and humility heavy in his chest. He asked quietly for one name, Elder Dahlia. They pointed toward a narrow alley where an old woman in a green shawl sat beneath an olive tree, grinding herbs with careful hands. When she saw Rashid, her brow lifted, not in fear, but in measured suspicion. "You're the man from the city," she said without rising. He replied, bowing slightly. "I came to understand the girl who saved my life." Dahlia squinted at him. "Amina?" He nodded. "She saved many lives, not just yours," the elder said, voice dry as the wind. "That girl gave up her schooling to raise her brother, sold her jewelry, her mother's last shawl, even her own shoes to buy medicine for a neighbor's child. When the well collapsed, she dug with her bare hands before the men arrived." Rashid felt his throat tighten. "I thought I knew her," he murmured. "Peace," Dahlia said, "but no man ever truly sees a woman until he knows what she's endured in silence." He sat with the elder a while longer, listening to stories that weren't in any file or background check. Stories soaked in dirt and courage. Amina, as a child, breaking a bread roll in half when she only had one. Amina, chasing a wild dog off from the neighbor's goat. Amina, always choosing others before herself. When Rashid stood to leave, Dahlia pressed something into his palm, a delicate circle of woven desert reeds. "She made this when she was 10, the elder said, called it her wedding ring for a man who'd never make her cry." Rashid stared at it, breath stilled. The woven reeds were dry but strong, softened at the edges, worn but intact. Later that night, Amina returned from the Foundation's education center in the city to find the estate dimly lit. No grand lights, no guards, just lanterns lining the walkway to the garden. He waited under the fig tree where they'd once shared tea. When she saw him, her pace slowed, the wind tugged gently at her scarf. "Did something happen?" she asked, heart skimming her throat. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and knelt, not with a diamond, but with the ring of woven reeds held carefully in his palm. Amina gasped, her fingers flying to her lips. He didn't recite a grand speech. He just said, quietly, "Marry me." She blinked, stunned. Rashid is the billionaire, not for headlines, not because of what we've endured, his voice broke slightly, but as the man who owes you his soul. Tears welled in her eyes, too quickly to stop. She stepped back, shaking her head softly. "I'm not ready." His heart ached, but he nodded without resistance. "Then let me wait," he said. The next morning, Amina stood by the window of her room in the estate, watching the garden below. The sunrise painted gold across the tiled roofs, but her thoughts lingered elsewhere. On Rashid's eyes as he held out that ring of reeds. There had been no pressure in his voice, no demand in his posture. Only something she rarely saw in powerful men. Patience. She traced the window pane with her fingertips and whispered, "Why does that make it harder?" Later that day, she returned to her work. The education center they'd been planning, now more than a dream, was being built on the edge of the city. Amina oversaw the project's logistics, drawing from her years of street-mark survival. She met with contractors, ordered supplies, designed safety for every child who'd ever gone unnoticed. Rashid didn't interfere. He simply watched her become everything the world once tried to crush. They crossed paths often in the estate, brief glances over breakfast, silent walks in the garden. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. One evening, as Amina reviewed lesson plans in the courtyard, Rashid approached with a tray of tea, her favorite, cinnamon and sage. She arched an eyebrow. "You're serving now?" "I figured it was time I earned something around here," he said with a quiet smile. She laughed, despite herself. "You don't have to try so hard," he said. "This is who I am when no one's watching." They sat in silence, sipping tea as the stars bloomed overhead. "You know," Amina said after a long pause, "when I was young, I thought love was something grand and explosive. A dramatic rescue, a perfect man, a perfect life." "Now," Rashid asked, watching her carefully. "Now I think love might be quieter than I imagined. Maybe it's someone who waits when you need time, who doesn't walk away when things aren't easy." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the woven ring, and set it gently on the table between them. "Still yours," he said, "even if you never wear it." She looked at the ring, not jeweled, not extravagant, just simple, honest, like the parts of her she was only now learning to honor. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I swear it," he said. She met his gaze then, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. The next morning, she returned to the school site early. The children gathered around her like birds, their notebooks flapping, their laughter rising into the sky. Amina knelt beside a girl who couldn't spell her name and said, "You will, one letter at a time." That afternoon, Rashid found her painting a wall, brushed in one hand, streaks of blue on her cheek. He watched for a moment, then picked up a brush and joined her. By sunset, the wall bore a mural of mountains and books, doves in flight. Their hands were stained with paint, but neither seemed to care. When a gust of wind lifted her scarf, Rashid caught it gently and handed it back with a soft smile. "Still don't have an answer," she said. "I'm still not in a hurry," he replied. That night, as the desert wind curled through the estate and the moonlight touched every quiet corner, Amina placed the reed ring on her nightstand. Not on her finger, not yet. But it was closer now. And that was enough. The morning sun rose over Dubai with its usual golden authority, but the headlines that flooded Rashid Al-Mansoor's inbox carried a storm. Screens across the region blazed with footage from a rival press conference where Zayed Qadir, a longtime business adversary, stood behind a podium, declaring war without bullets. She danced for sympathy and spun stories of struggle, Zayed sneered before the cameras. And yet our youth programs are closing, our donors vanishing, all because Rashid chose scandal over substance. Amina watched the clip from her tablet, seated alone on the balcony. Her hands were trembling. The words weren't just an attack on Rashid. They were a carefully orchestrated smear against everything she had worked to rise above. Within hours, the effects rippled. Major sponsors froze their contributions to Rashid's education initiative. Phone calls went unanswered. Emails were curt. Journalists circled the estate like vultures waiting for something to die. By late afternoon, protesters lined the estate's front gates, shouting, waving signs, some holding up the same viral headline, "Billionaire's Desert Mistress, Tanks Youth Program." Amina remained inside, pacing the hallways, heart pounding with guilt. This is because of me. Rashid met her in the atrium. His face was composed, but his eyes bore the weight of everything crumbling around them. I can fix this, she said quietly. He reached for her hand but stopped short. You don't need to. Just then, the shatter of glass exploded through the room. A brick had smashed the window above them. Security scrambled. Amina dropped to the floor as shards rained down, covering her arms in tiny cuts. But Rashid, he didn't duck in time. The corner of the brick had struck his forehead. Blood streamed down the side of his temple as his knees buckled. "Rashid!" she screamed, rushing to him. Everything blurred. Security guards pulled them to safety. Paramedics arrived. As Rashid was wheeled into the ambulance, Amina sat beside him, her hand clutched around his fingers. It was the first time she'd touched him, without hesitation, without fear of what it meant. "You saved my brother," she whispered. "Let me save you now." At the hospital, machines beeped, nurses hovered, and doctors whispered in clipped Arabic. Amina sat in the cold white corridor, hands clenched in prayer. She had never felt more helpless or more determined. When the doctor finally emerged with a nod of reassurance, she exhaled deeply and stepped inside. Rashid lay in the bed, eyes closed, bandaged and pale, but alive. She sat beside him and reached for his hand again, this time holding it tightly between both of hers. "I can't let the world destroy you," she whispered. "Not for something I never meant to bring." Then she stood and walked out, not to flee, but to face the fire. That evening, Amina appeared live on one of the region's most watched broadcasts. Cameras focused, lights burned hot on her skin. A reporter asked the question without ceremony, "Do you love Rashid Al-Mansoor?" Amina looked into the lens, her voice calm and fierce. "I love what he's building. I love what he's trying to do for children no one else will help. And yes, I love that he saw me, not for where I came from, but for who I could become." The room was silent, the world watching. "I danced once," she said, "but not for lust, for survival, for freedom, and I would do it again if it meant saving the ones I love." The interview aired across time zones. Within hours, social media flooded with comments, videos, and messages, most of them in her favor. Hashtags like Stand with Amina and @YourTruth in her voice trended across platforms. Even critics who once doubted her now questioned the cost of silence, the cruelty of old money scandals. Something had shifted. Inside the hospital, Rashid awoke to the glow of his phone buzzing incessantly on the side table. His assistant, Karim, stood nearby with wide eyes. "Sir," she turned everything around. Rashid's brow furrowed as he took the device and scrolled through a flurry of notifications, positive headlines, reposted clips of her broadcast, and supportive statements from foundations and influencers he never expected. "She didn't just calm the storm," Karim said. "She redefined it." By the time Amina returned, the room was filled with soft sunlight and warm silence. Rashid sat upright, bruised but stronger. He looked at her like he hadn't before, not as someone he needed to protect, but as someone who had protected him. She crossed the room slowly. "You look less like a fallen king, and more like a man lucky enough to be seen," he said quietly. "By the right eyes." A pause stretched between them, gentle and electric. "Boards reinstated full support," Karim announced as he stepped in with a nod. "They've apologized and doubled the budget." Amina blinked. "Seriously?" And I quote, "She's the story we didn't know we needed." Rashid waved the assistant out, then turned to Amina with a softness that melted the last bit of guarded tension. "You did more than save me," he said, his voice low. "You saved us." She shook her head, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't do it for that." He nodded. "I know." He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't hesitate. That evening, as the sun slipped below the Dubai skyline, the estate's courtyard glowed with restored energy. Staff moved through their duties with quiet joy. News crews that once camped in protest now stood in awe at the sudden turn of tide. Rashid sat with Amina in the garden, where citrus trees blossomed, their scent rising on the breeze. For a long time neither spoke. They simply existed, side by side, hands linked, heartbeats aligned. "I used to think silence meant weakness," she said softly. "I used to believe noise meant control," he replied. "We were both wrong." She looked at him. "Are you still waiting for an answer?" His gaze didn't flinch. "Only if it comes with your truth." Amina leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed. "Then hear this. When I stood on that stage and told the world who I was, it was the first time I didn't feel ashamed." Rashid kissed the crown of her head gently. "Then we've already won." They sat in the quiet hum of the night, not as a billionaire and a village girl, not as scandal and savior, but as two people who had been broken and healed, and chosen again and again, not in spite of the fire, but because of it. The desert wind that evening was softer than usual, brushing across the dunes like a whispered blessing. The horizon blushed with twilight, painting the sky in strokes of rose gold and lavender. In the center of a quiet expanse stood a single string of lights, swaying gently above a circle of woven rugs and desert blooms. There were no velvet chairs or gold pillars, no photographers flashing bulbs, just a small circle of people who mattered. A younger brother, Kareem, now smiling and stronger than he'd ever been, Rashid's sister, Layla, and a few trusted staff, a quiet elder from Amina's village who had once cradled her after her mother's passing. All were seated beneath the stars, watching in reverent silence. Amina stepped forward, barefoot on the warm sand, her white linen dress trailing behind her like a prayer. Her hair flowed freely, adorned only with a single jasmine flower at her temple. She didn't need diamonds or silk. She didn't want them. She walked toward Rashid with steady grace, every step a defiance of the pain she once carried. He stood tall in a crisp linen sherani, understated and classic. But his eyes had already bowed in awe the moment he saw her. The mask of the untouchable billionaire was long gone. This was just a man, trembling inside, as the woman he loved stepped toward him. The elder cleared his throat gently and spoke a simple blessing in Arabic, one that referenced soil and rain and soul. Then he gestured. Amina took a small breath and reached into her dress pocket, unfolding a note she had written by candlelight the night before. Her hands shook slightly as she began. "Every night I feared tomorrow," she said, voice barely above the wind. "You gave me today, not with promises or poetry, but with presence. You didn't save me, Rashid. You reminded me I could save myself." Rashid closed his eyes for a beat, as if memorizing the words straight into his bloodstream. "I vowed to stand beside you," Amina continued, "not as someone who needs your world, but as someone who chooses to build a new one with you, where truth isn't shameful and love isn't hidden." There was no applause, just a shared stillness, as if the desert itself had held its breath in reverence. When it was Rashid's turn, he cleared his throat and looked down at the sand for a moment before locking eyes with her. "With told that wealth can buy anything, land, loyalty, legacy," his voice trembled, "but you are the only gift I could never purchase. You're not mine because I sought you, you're mine because you stayed." He reached into his own pocket and held out a delicate band made from hand-woven desert reeds, just like the one from his original proposal. An airy experience. With a nod from the elder, they exchanged the rings of resilience woven into circles that would never forget the past. Afterward, there was no choreographed first dance, no orchestra or spotlight. Instead, Amina and Rashid moved to the center of the rugs. He offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. No music played, just the hush of wind, the whisper of palm fronds nearby, and their heartbeats syncing as their bodies moved. A slow sway, a silent rhythm. Amina rested her cheek against his chest. Rashid exhaled against her temple. They were dancing, not as spectacle, but as salvation. As they continued their quiet dance beneath the stars, the guests remained seated, watching with a kind of sacred reverence. No one spoke. No one dared break the stillness that wrapped around Amina and Rashid like a second. Then, as the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the dunes, Kareem stepped forward. His small hands clutched something behind his back. Amina gently pulled away from Rashid as Karim approached, eyes wide with shy pride. "I made this," he said, his voice trembling, "for both of you." He held out a small pendant made from copper wire and old beads, recycled scraps he had gathered from their ruined home. In the center, a single stone from the village lay nestled in the wire. Amina's hand flew to her mouth. Rashid crouched beside the boy, carefully lifting the pendant. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Karim looked at his sister. "Mama would have been proud, you know." Tears filled Amina's eyes as she knelt down and hugged her brother. "She'd be proud of you, Karim. You're the reason I kept going." Rashid stood behind them, silent but present, his eyes glossy, overwhelmed by the purity of the moment. Later, as night fell deeper and lanterns were lit one by one across the sand, the small gathering turned to celebration. Simple dishes were passed around: spiced rice, roasted lamb, warm dates. There were no caterers, no wine lists. Just laughter, memory, and kinship. Amina walked among them all, barefoot and glowing. Rashid watched her move, how her presence made the elderly smile, how the children clung to her skirt. She was not a guest in this life anymore. She belonged here. He took a quiet seat beside her when she finally returned to their spot under the lights. "I never thought I'd find peace," she said, brushing hair from her face. He tilted his head, studying her. "And now, I think peace found me." He took her hand. "I've built empires, Amina, but none of them ever made me feel like this." Before she could respond, fireworks lit the sky in bursts of silver and gold. The night cracked open with color, streaks flashing high above their heads. She gasped, then laughed, a sound Rashid had come to crave. His hand found hers again and squeezed it gently. In the distance, someone began humming a tune. Soon, a soft drum joined in. The rhythm was old, familiar, a lullaby from their homeland. Amina leaned her head on Rashid's shoulder as the melody carried over the dunes. "I once danced to survive," she whispered. "Tonight, I dance because I'm alive." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You were always alive, you just needed a place to bloom." And there, under a sky stitched with stars and color, Amina bloomed. Not as a girl who once danced for coins, but as a woman who had rewritten her story. With truth, with courage, with love. Their story had begun in fire and fear. But tonight, it ended in light. And in the quiet between heartbeats, a legacy was born. 6 months later, the desert village that once watched Amina dance in desperation now gathered for an entirely different reason. The air buzzed, not with rumors or judgment, but with celebration. A new building stood at the edge of the village square, its soft sand-colored walls etched with verses of hope. Above the entrance, a sign read, "The Horizon Center for Women's Skill and Future." It had been Amina's dream, sparked in the ashes of loss, nurtured in the quiet moments with Rashid, and realized with her relentless heart. Women from the village and nearby towns lined up at the doors, not to watch or to whisper, but to learn, to grow, to claim something that had once seemed unreachable. Inside the bright classrooms, sewing machines hummed, books lined handmade shelves, and laughter spilled through the hallways. Amina moved through it all like a gentle force, sipping to adjust a child's collar, to praise a young woman's embroidery, to welcome newcomers with warmth that melted decades of fear. Rashid stood quietly at the entrance, dressed in plain linen, his eyes not on the cameras, but on her. He had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar deals, but nothing grounded him like the sight of Amina laughing with a room full of women who had once believed they had no voice. Later that afternoon, a ribbon-cutting ceremony was held under a canopy of flowering vines. Amina held the scissors with Karim by her side, his smile wide as he looked out at the crowd. She glanced at Rashid, who gave her a slight nod, one that carried pride and awe. Snip. The ribbon fell, and with it, a new era began. Orders arrived the next day. One in particular, a sharp-eyed woman with a notebook and a curious tilt to her brow, requested an interview. Amina hesitated. Media had once nearly destroyed her, but she agreed. They sat under the shade of a tamarind tree, the village humming behind them. "You've built something remarkable," the reporter said, voice cautious but genuine. Amina smiled. "We've all built it. This center belongs to every woman who was told she had no worth." The reporter scribbled something, then paused. "Can I ask? Do you regret it? The dance?" The air hung still. Amina's eyes didn't flinch. "No," she said simply. "I don't regret surviving." Silence followed. Then the reporter nodded slowly, understanding more than she could write. That evening, Amina walked with Karim past the school. He had grown taller, his shoulders more sure, his eyes filled with curiosity and the quiet hunger of someone who knew books could change lives. He stopped suddenly and pointed to the far side of the center, where a small sign was being installed on a second building, one that would house classrooms for teaching literacy, business, and the arts. "What's it going to be called?" Karim asked. Amina turned to Rashid, who was helping the workers settle the frame. She stepped forward, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. Written in her own handwriting was the name she'd chosen. With a soft, steady hand, she passed it to the man mounting the plaque. The final name was etched in gold script beneath the school's emblem. Amina bint Zayer, Learning Center. Karim blinked. "You used your real name?" Amina replied, voice thick. "Because that's who I've always been. No shame, no disguise, just me." Later that evening, string lights twinkled above the village square. Children played tag between rows of tables laden with warm bread, spiced rice, and hand-rolled pastries. Women who once never left their homes now danced freely in the sand, barefoot and laughing. It wasn't a gala, it wasn't a ceremony, it was community. Amina stood beside Rashid near the fire pit, the glow reflecting in her eyes. He handed her a cup of sweet mint tea, his fingers brushing hers. "Do you ever miss the city?" he asked quietly. Amina looked out across the smiling faces, the restored well, the rebuilt homes. "Oh," she said, "the city never knew my name, but this place sings it." Rashid reached for her hand, lifting it slowly to his lips. "You gave them hope, Amina. You made the world stop long enough to listen." She leaned into his shoulder. "You saw me when I didn't even recognize myself." From behind them, Karim called her name. He stood near the edge of the garden they'd planted together, holding a small tray of saplings. Gifts from a school in Dubai that now partnered with the center. She smiled. "Let's go." They walked over, planting each sapling side by side. One for every girl who would come through their gates. One for every voice that would finally be heard. After the last tree was nestled in the soil, Rashid knelt and gently wiped her hands clean with a cloth. "I used to think legacy was steel towers and corporate empires," he said. "But it's this, isn't it? A garden, a name remembered for kindness." Amina nodded. "A legacy you can touch, one that grows." Later, as the fire cracked in the night, Rashid gathered the villagers for a surprise. With a wave of his hand, a large white canvas was unrolled across the side of the building. Projected onto it was the short documentary images of the women at work, the children learning, and Amina herself walking the halls of the center. The final frame paused on her signature beneath the school's name. A hush fell over the crowd. She stepped forward, suddenly overwhelmed. "I spent so much of my life being silent," she said. "Ashamed of what I didn't have, what I had to do to survive. But survival isn't shame. Survival is strength. And today, I am proud, not just of what we've built, but of who we've become." Tears shimmered in the firelight. Her brother clapped first, then everyone followed. As the night deepened, music began. Soft, rhythmic, full of memory. Rashid extended his hand. Amina laughed softly. "You still have 2 left feet." "Have one now," he teased. "The other belongs to you." They danced slowly beneath the stars, barefoot in the sand. There was no choreography, no spotlight, just the rise and fall of their breath, the rhythm of a future neither had dared imagine before. Children circled them, giggling, mimicking their steps. One girl asked, "Miss Amina, will we always have this school?" She knelt down, cupping the girl's face. "As long as your dreams live, so will this place." Then, with the night cooling and dawn still far away, Rashid took her hand and whispered, "You'll never walk alone again, Amina bint Zaire." She smiled, free, grounded, and whole. And with that, their legacy truly began.